I literally want to cry. So if you didn't know, I have a sister and her name's Ashley, and we both have boyfriends. And every night we both fall asleep on the phone with our boyfriends. So one day we're all hanging out and we're like just talking, and my sister's boyfriend looks at me and he's like, "You need to stop going into your sister's room in the middle of the night." And I look at him and I'm like, "What are you talking about? I don't have a reason to go into her room. Like, I don't go into her room, especially in the middle of the night." Then my boyfriend hops in the conversation and he's like, no. He's like, "No, I hear Ashley go into Kayla's room every night and stare at her." So me and my sister both look at each other and we're like, we don't go into each other's rooms, do we? And we agreed that we do not. And they said this has been going on for months. So for months, somebody or something has been going into me and my sister's room for about 15 minutes every night and watching us sleep. But it only...
Has anyone ever told you not to do something and that just made you want to do it more? Once, 3 girls went into a video rental store to find a horror movie to watch. They came across an old tape, but the woman at the store told them they weren't allowed to watch it. After one girl stole the tape, they decided to watch it together. But what they would see would terrify them. They pressed play. Suddenly, the room went into darkness with only the TV on. On screen, they saw a woman tied to a wooden stake. She was surrounded by an angry crowd carrying torches, until one man walked towards the woman and set the wood beneath her feet on fire. The woman began laughing, and as the flames reached her face, she screamed that all who witnessed her death would suffer the same fate in 2 days. Then the tape cut off. The girls were scared, but eventually convinced themselves it was a prank. They decided to return the tape, but when they went back to the store, they found that it was gone. It was just an abandoned building. 2 days later, all 3 girls were found scattered across the city, their bodies burned beyond recognition. When the police investigated the strange coincidence, they found nothing around the girls had been touched by flames at all, except the trash can outside of one of their homes. Everything inside had been turned to ash, except for one mysterious videotape, which was left untouched. Never play this game with your friends. Once there was a group of girls who heard about the game Baby Blue. They didn't believe in it but thought they could scare their friend Laura. So they sent Laura into a bathroom by herself. She turned off the lights, closed the door, and put her arms out as if to hold a baby. Then started chanting Baby Blue 13 times. What happened next cannot be explained. Laura felt a heavy weight in her arms. Then she felt the weight in her arms scratching her. She was terrified and didn't know what to do. She wanted to drop it, but she was afraid of what might happen if she did. So she froze, and the weight grew heavier and heavier. Suddenly, she saw a woman in the bathroom mirror with a twisted look on her face. She screamed in terror. When her friends heard her scream, they tried to open the door, but it was locked. When they finally opened the door, they found Laura on the floor. Her eyes had been scratched out. They tried to move her body, but they couldn't, because something large and invisible was pinning her to the ground. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if you couldn't see, hear, smell, taste, or touch? In 1983, a group of scientists thought that a human without any senses would be able to perceive God, so they found an elderly man who volunteered to have all of his senses surgically destroyed for this experiment. He would be completely alone with his thoughts. After a few days, he claimed that he heard his dead wife speaking to him. Then he began naming the dead relatives of the scientists and only information that their dead relatives would know. After a week, he started throwing himself against a wall to try and feel some kind of pain, but he couldn't. He tried to claw at his non-functioning eyes, but he felt nothing. He began to yell, "No heaven, no forgiveness," for 5 hours straight. In the end, he had to be physically restrained for weeks. When he turned his blind eyes and made direct eye contact for the first time with a scientist and said, "I have spoken to God, and he has abandoned us," before his heart stopped for no apparent reason. Do you know someone who had a crush that went too far? Jason only loved 2 things, butterflies and Angie. He wanted to ask her out for ages, but never had the courage to. He was always kind of a strange kid, with his obsession with butterflies and all. All his school supplies in his room were all decorated with butterflies. People at school didn't know much about him except that. Some rumors flew around every once in a while though. Some people even said that his mother had gifted him a butterfly resin before she passed away. Angie, however, never made fun of him. In fact, when Jason asked her on Halloween weekend if he could drive her to a costume party together, she thought it was charming, but things took a dark turn quickly. At first, the car ride was awkward, but not anything to be worried about. Then Angie looked at her phone and saw that they passed the address of the party. She said, "Hey, you're going the wrong way," but there was only a grin on Jason's face. The next day, police found both Angie and Jason. Jason was lying on the ground, cold, but above him, Angie was strung up on the ceiling, with 2 large pieces cut out from her back and opened up to look like wings.
This is what they meant when they said, "Don't talk to strangers." In the early 1900s, a 10-year-old boy was playing in the woods when a tall man appeared and asked if he wanted to come back to his cabin for dinner. Totally caught off guard, the boy reluctantly agrees and begins walking. When they get to the cabin, the boy is relieved when he sees Paul, a family friend, sitting on the porch, so the boy happily goes inside. After they eat, the boy says thank you to the strange tall man, says bye to Paul, and then he leaves. He had only walked a few steps when he sees his family, along with Paul, running up the path towards him, frantically asking if he was okay. Confused, the boy says, I'm just fine, and he looks at Paul and he's like, why didn't you tell them I was with you at the cabin? And he points over his shoulder. Paul glances over the boy's shoulder and then narrows his eyes and says, you were kidnapped by a cult 3 days ago. No one's seen you. Terrified, the boy turns around to look at the cabin he just came from, and it's gone. All he sees is a dark forest that stretches for miles. This is why you always say yes to tandoori chicken. In 2012, a high school tutor and her student stayed up so late one night studying that by the time they were done, the buses had stopped running. Without another way home, the student asked if he could stay the night at her place. Reluctantly, she agreed. When they got back to the apartment, she fell asleep on her bed and he fell asleep on a blanket next to her bed on the ground. A few hours later, she wakes up to the boy standing awkwardly in the middle of the room with a very strange look on his face. She asks him, what's wrong? He looks at her and says, I'm really hungry. Let's go get some tandoori chicken. Confused, she says, it's 2 a.m. Just get a snack in the cupboard. And he grabs her by the arm and he says, no, we are getting tandoori chicken right now. And he yanks her from the bed. Feeling totally caught off guard by this whole situation, she goes into the hall with the boy, and as soon as the door shuts behind them, she can tell that he is terrified. He looks at her and just says, I'm not actually hungry. When I woke up, there was someone under your...
Have you ever felt like you've forgotten something but can't remember exactly what you forgot? Well, for this one woman, this feeling would lead to a terrifying discovery. She was on the bus on her way home from work one night when she was certain she left something behind in the office. She thought to herself, maybe it's nothing. She had a long day and she just wanted to go home for the night. But of course, she could have never expected the horrifying truth. This feeling of not being able to remember what she forgot.
Pizza Hut's £5 favorites menu
She thought about
offers
everything that happened that
medium-sized
day.
pizza and
Her boss
sides for
staring at her
this
creepily, the secretaries gossiping, then she bumped into a man on the bus. She quickly said sorry, but he ignored her. As the bus came to her stop, she stood outside her home and couldn't shake the feeling anymore. She had to go back to the office to find out exactly what she forgot. It was very late at night at this point, but she made it back. She ran up the stairs and opened the office door, but what she saw could only be described as unimaginable. As this woman slowly knelt down on the floor, she finally realized what she left behind. It was her body lying on the floor, strangled to death. If you ever see a red car, don't do what he did. Once there was a man in Mexico who took a night shift at work. After work, as he was walking home, he saw a bright red car. The red car pulled up in front of him and 3 women were inside. They asked if he needed a ride home, and because he thought they were beautiful and harmless young women, he agreed. The next morning, his wife realized he never came back home. She called his work and they didn't know where he was either, so she called the police. The police then went to his workplace, which is where he was last seen, and began searching. A few miles away, they found his body. It was lying on the side of the road with strange symbols carved all over. The 3 women in the red car turned out to be witches who traveled the road looking for men, usually those who wander the streets late at night. When they found these men, they would entice them to get into their car with them, promise him they could fulfill all of his dreams, then begin their dark occult ritual where he would be sacrificed to the devil. But the most disturbing part of the story is that the bright red car that these witches were driving were painted from the blood of all of their victims. Can you imagine being locked inside your